Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, good to see you today.
It's great to see you too, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Very good. We're going to talk about something that is right up to date. The problem was just created yesterday. Oh, no, I'm making a mistake there. It was created 5,000 years ago. And that is when governments screw up and make things difficult and they interfere in the market. Believe it or not, even 5,000 years ago, they understood about market because markets are pretty natural. And, there's bartering and all kinds of things. And then they had government money. And all of a sudden, there were problems. And they've existed ever since. The wage and price controls. That is to solve the problems of all the mistakes that the government makes. That's how I look at it. And guess what? It makes things worse. And you never would have guessed that when the politicians get involved in trying to correct the mistakes that they made, sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's out of total ignorance, but they generally make things much worse. It's interesting. It is a big deal in history and in economics, the wage and price control. And, I'm not all that old, but I do remember three major times that wage and price controls were introduced in this country, and a lot of minor times too. But the major times was, I remember World War II very clearly. My dad was in the retail dairy business and would sell butter, and we as little kids knew about stamps, rationing stamps, and we'd have to collect the stamps and the money. If somebody came to our little dairy, which was actually at our house, we had to do both, collect the money and collect the stamps. So we learned about that very early on, and then I finally figured it out later on that all that activity had nothing to do with helping the people. The purpose was, along with selling war bonds, the war bonds, we need your help. But, that isn't the way they finance the war. They finance the war with printing money, and then they'd come up with this to bring people together. Everybody's going to have food rationing and whatnot. I'll tell you what, just from personal experience, it didn't even operate there, because I had some family members, including my dad, who was really strict by the rules. You follow the rules and you don't mess around with a government regulation. But I can recall him that when the people that would bring the meat into town, the black market meat that wasn't available anywhere, and everybody knew they were coming. So on Saturday afternoon, everybody crowded around. The interesting part that dawned on me years later was it was across the street from the police station, and but people would go there. So people got around it, and it was in order to get people to join in the effort, and maybe it was to distract by who's causing what kind of trouble. Second time, Korea War. Wage and price controls then, and that wasn't as bad as what happened in World War II. But the one that I remember very clearly was in the early 1970s when Bretton Woods broke down and the prices were going up rapidly. And Nixon, that was one of the reasons the Bretton Woods broke down. They couldn't maintain this fake gold standard any longer, so they put on wage and price controls to control things from getting out of hand. And of course that didn't solve the problem at all. But the one thing I remember clearly about that, I remember the day the wage and price controls were put on, which would have been like the 16th of August, the day afterwards. The rules were written, and all of a sudden the prices were controlled, and all of a sudden all the business people had to think about, to replace what they had, whether it was gasoline or whatever, the prices would go up a lot, and it was. And the markets went down, and the unemployment was really a mess. To me, it was the one time when I could see the difference between a mismanaged economy, a central economically planned economy that was failing, and there was relative liberty, versus the time there was no pricing. They destroyed the pricing mechanism, and it shut down everything quickly, so it was just overnight. Of course, it lasted a year or two, and it was never smooth. And those ideas have never gone away. I would say, Chris, today we don't have quite the same, but price controls and interference by the government is always messing around with the prices. Today it's in a way more sinister because it's directed to one company versus another company. It's used with protectionism and sanctions and these sort of things, always interfering with the most important thing in the economy. You can't run a voluntary economy without voluntary pricing. So that's why it's so damaging. And I'll talk about this in a minute a little bit more, but the most important price is actually the price of money, the interest rates. If you mess around with the interest rates, guess what? You can end up with a really, really rocky economy, and I think that's what's happening to us right now.
Right, Dr. Paul, and we're talking about price controls today because we could already start to see, even in the media, we're starting to see, should Biden, fix the price of gasoline and food? So they're already talking about it, and like you said, this is government, constantly trying to fix previous mistakes, and they only make the mistakes even bigger and problems even bigger. And, in our country, we suffer from a bad case of believing that government must always do something. No matter if it's big or small, government, what are they going to do about it? Well, they're spending trillions and trillions of dollars. That's certainly doing something. But government doesn't have trillions of dollars. I mean, where are they getting this money? They certainly tax us, that's for sure, and they borrow money, which is fine, but governments can borrow money, but that doesn't cover all the money that they're spending, and the government can't print its own money. That's unconstitutional, but they found a way to get around that. You have this so-called private Federal Reserve that prints up trillions and trillions of dollars and loans it to the government, and that's how the government spending takes place. But all of these trillions of dollars, it ends up driving prices up in the economy. And now prices are up. We're seeing it in the news all the time. We see it on the shelves. And what's government going to do about it? Well, they're going to add even bigger problems by probably imposing price controls, which Dr. Paul pointed out, they've been making that error for thousands of years, but it doesn't seem to matter. People keep repeating the same mistakes. So all of these interventions and the Federal Reserve, they create all of these problems and they only make them progressively bigger.
Yes, and there is one time when price control is put on. It's not exactly like what we're talking about here, but it's similar because the government's always messing up with regulations and with the regulations have and the inflation exists. And that is what happens during a hurricane. We live along the coast and we see hurricanes. They come and go. Sometimes the threat is very great, greater than what the storms actually are. But it's always a problem because guess what? People know that they might get locked down, locked in their homes, and so they need goods and services. So all of a sudden, the shelves are empty, the gas pumps are gone, and filling up your cars, which is a natural, and there's nothing abnormal about that. But the whole thing is the customers get angry because some people will sneak some goods and services in, and they will raise the price. And they are the gougers. They're price gougers, taking advantage of these terrible situations that nature have created. And the government has to do something about that. It's not the people's fault. They dismiss the fact that the monetary system might play a role in it. But anyway, they come in and they put on these controls, and you become an evil person if you stayed up all night, drove a truck, through bad weather, and still just barely opening the doors to get in to help people, hauling in some goods and services and fuel, and he says, I'm going to charge you more. Let's just say he doubles the price of it. And most people are anxious to see it, and they do it, and they say, oh, that's terrible. He should be a humanitarian and do it for the same amount, even though he can't produce it for the same amount. So they do that. They raise the prices, and it's not all that bad because that means that there are shortages. If you allow the market to work, guess what? A day or two after somebody gouged all those people, somebody says, boy, I'm going in there. I'm going to take a load of lumber in. There's a shortage of lumber, and it's very expensive, and I can provide this, and I can make some money doing it. So the price is going up motivates the increase in supply, but it never dawns on them. The evil is always because somebody raised the price. In the same way with labor. What if they needed laborers and it was under dire conditions, and you go in there, instead of making your $10 an hour, you got to make $20 an hour. That's what labor was costing not too long ago. But they could go in there and make more. So the motivation there solves the problem. But that doesn't satisfy the bureaucrat. The bureaucrat has to be the one, even if they contributed to the problem, they have to be the ones that are solving the problem. And of course, guess what? The politician, the bureaucrats make the conditions much worse.
Yes, and as we've pointed out, price controls, you could go all the way back even to the Roman times. They did price controls. It leads to shortages all the time. The United States 70s leads to shortages. So it's been done so many times that you have to think that perhaps authoritarian politicians know exactly what's going to happen. They know the price controls will create shortages. But they also know that people will want government to do something about those shortages. So what does government usually do once price controls lead to shortages? They move to rationing. And authoritarians love to tell people, who can buy and when they can buy and how much they can buy. They love that kind of stuff. Look at what we just went through with COVID. There are authoritarian politicians up and down our government at every single level. So if they know that, okay, there'll be shortages, but then we can move to rationing, then they'll start making up all these absurd rules. If your last name begins with a vowel, you can buy gas on Monday and Wednesday, or even better, if you had 3 or 4 vaccines, you could buy gas every day. They'll incentivize you. So they would love that level of control, rationing. Yeah, price controls create shortages, but that's a great opportunity for doing, for these types of people that love to push people around and control people. So perhaps that's why we keep seeing for thousands of years price controls, keep reappearing. They're terrible for the people, but authoritarians, they have a lot of incentive and they gain a lot of power, with dealing with the results that they produce.
I'm sure they had instincts realizing that when they were debasing the currency, prices did go up, but generally speaking, the economists didn't endorse that idea in those thousands of years ago, and it took a long time for them to figure it out that the inflation is such an important part of this equation, because it was known for many, many centuries that supply and demands of goods and services would deal with the pricing, and it was very important. That would tell the producer, what to do, how can they produce, and how would that happen. But it took a long, long time until recent history to show that something else was important. And Mises has pointed it out, and other Austrian economists, that it's really important to know about the supply and demand of the other side of the equation, the assets and the goods and services, but the supply and demand of the money. And that was not known as much then. But it is known now, and it makes a big deal difference if you realize that. But right now, so the main motivation for the politician is to hide his responsibility, and the people really don't want to hear it, because the answer would be, quit spending money. You have to repeal the welfare state. You have to quit fighting these senseless wars. You have to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and then maybe you can solve some of these problems. But there's not many people who have a stomach for that, even though they do have a stomach for causing a lot of harm and making themselves look good. Well, we care about the people, and we have a humanitarian instincts, but it doesn't work that way. sound economic policies and free markets. Adam Smith coined the word the invisible hand, and I certainly think that's the case. How does this all happen when you have a free market? Things work so well. But I said they forgot about the invisible hand, and now we have the iron fist. That's what determines everything. And the penalties, and they're still that way. Just think of the penalties that people get now for violating the authorities, for violating a COVID mandate. So yes, that's an insult. That's an attack on the establishment, and they have to stop that. That's why they don't stop it with common sense. They stop it by saying, you better not do it or we will really punish you. And that, of course, makes things much worse.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up. Before I do, I apologize because it's getting kind of noisy. People are working outside. That's part of doing the live. We can't control everything. So if you can hear noise, I apologize that it's coming from my end. I'll close by saying we do have to change philosophy in this country from government always having to do something to ideally do nothing. But that is too far of a stretch for most people today. Even saying, well, how about this? Instead of do nothing, how about only do what's constitutional? Unfortunately, even doing what's constitutional would be a tremendous shock to most Americans because virtually everything that the federal government does today is unconstitutional. And it's pretty amazing because imagine everybody that's in government, their very first act is to raise their right hand, put their hand on the Bible, and swear to uphold the Constitution. Very, very, very few actually do. Vast majority that actually happens to be their first official lie in entering government, sure to be followed by many more lies. So they don't follow the Constitution. So it's even saying, well, just follow the Constitution. How about, if that's too much, how about stop moving away? How about just stop and head towards the Constitution? That's the next best thing. I mean, the bottom line is we've drifted very, very far from liberty, from freedom in this country, and it may be even too far to turn around. It will probably be what Dr. Paul has said. There's going to be a severe financial crisis. Everyone will learn just how broke this government is. It is not the goose that lays the golden egg. And so that's going to be very shocking to a lot of people, not to us, and to people that understand the ideas and share the ideas of liberty, because we're not under any illusions. We can see clearly, but a lot of people do not see clearly, which is why there needs to be more of us, because they're going to need some answers soon. And the more of us that there are that understand the ideas of liberty, the more of us can provide those answers.
Very good, Chris. When we talk about wage and price controls, there's an expense for just issuing these. In World War II, thousands and thousands of people were involved to police all this activity and punish them for not supporting the war effort. And that is a continuation that more bureaucracy and more spending money is going to solve the problem. But they never ask the question, I think, that should be asked when you're talking about pricing, the freedom of choice, voluntarism. But the other thing that's very important, which is better known, is even within this century, and that is in the 20th century and this century, the understanding of monetary policy. And that is the principle of a unit of account. The unit of account has to be sort of something that is trustworthy. It has to be something that the politicians can't control and they can't manipulate. And of course, for these 5,000 years, the unit of account has been a weight of a precious metal, and it's when they strayed from that they got into these problems. So the unit of account needs to be defined. I think if you don't have it, and you're working on a system of fair pricing, so everybody gets a fair shake, it's practically impossible. You can see the supply and demand in the marketplace can decide what the price of corn and potatoes should be and work out the answer, as long as there's freedom of choice. But if you have a mandated, dictated unit of account like we've had, especially in the last half a century since Bretton Woods broke down, there is no definition. I keep thinking that the best analogy I can use is the fact that, can you imagine somebody being told to build a skyscraper and he has a unit of account, a measuring rod, but it changes every day or every month, and all of a sudden maybe the foundation won't be so good because he might be not measuring things right, and that's what happens, and that's why price increase is very, very important, and the thing that everybody notices, and the people say, get the prices down. I don't have enough money, so they resort to just printing more money. But there's a lot more to it. When the unit of account is distorted and there's no restraint on spending, then what you end up with is not only price inflation, you end up with malinvestment, which means they do the wrong thing because one of, if not the most important price, is the price of interest. And of course, it's been zero in this past decade, and close to zero, and still lower, even though they're pretending they're going to raise it, which they won't be able to. So interest tells you a whole lot. It tells you what the saver should do, what the consumer should do with spending. It tells the investor what to do, and that is denied to us. That is not allowed because it's much easier to say, well, I understand there's a counterfeiter coming into town, and he's good. He actually has the counterfeiting machine that the Bureau of Engraving has, and he's going to pass out a lot of money. Oh, wow, nobody can tell the counterfeit. No, not. We hear they don't have it, so we're going to produce a lot of this counterfeit money, and all of a sudden prices go up. And they have these problems. So the unit of account is important, and this misinformation that regulations and dictates and punishments can solve the problems that the government created by getting rid of the unit of account and writing all these rules and regulations, because they know what is the fair and just price. And early in history, that's what they were motivated by, a bit of goodness there. They wanted a fair and just price without really understanding. The king really wanted a fair price for him. But no, I think the knowledge of economics, that's where I'm optimistic. In this, in the last 50 years or so, I think there's been tremendous increase in the information that has come from the Austrian School of Economics. And the sound money position, the necessity of getting rid of the Federal Reserve, spending excessive does not help the average person. Yeah, all those budgets and how those trillions of dollars these last few years really saved us from this calamity that was created by government interference in the COVID epidemic. So that is all made worse by that, and we just need a lot more confidence in what a free market can do and why liberty is so far superior to the authoritarianism and the whims of those that use authoritarianism to enhance their power and their own personal wealth. I think there's a better way, and I think it is not complicated, and it can be defined by supporting the whole concept of peace and prosperity by promoting liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.